Alrighty, hello every folks, and good morning. So today is going to be a crafting guide. Long story short, there's a lot of potential stuff to this, but we're going to try to kind of speedrun this as much as we can here. Okay, so first things first, when it comes to crafting, you can kind of think of it as having four different tiers of books that you can get for different recipes. So the first ones are just the ones that you're going to be able to buy in the shop here. These are the ones that are basically going to be able to carry you through the entire game. If we look over here, we got Melee 1 and 2, Ranged 1 and 2, Smithing 1 and 2, the Codex Jewelry 1 and 2, Ores, Timbers, Textiles, and Medicine. So, Ores, Timbers, and Textiles are basically required in order to make most of the base materials. Medicine is there for converting basically crappier healing items into better ones. Jewelry is for improving jewelry, as you'd expect, as are the others to their respective titles. So, as far as what's available, generally speaking, in most cases, these are going to be in the case of the weapons, a minor stat upgrade along with some other little benefits here and there. So, for example, early on, if we go over to the crafting menu here, like we can see if we go over to fists, you know, upgrading a cestus here, might just upgrade its stats a little. Bronze knuckles, upgrade its stats a little, but we go over to the Kapagna over here, and we see that it has a poison effect on there. So, basically anything that has a guaranteed hit will be able to also poison. So, you've basically got a bunch of little things that'll get improved for them overall, but generally speaking, in most cases, if you can only have the resources to go for one, usually go for the ones with a different on-hit effect. So these will be different as time goes on, but generally speaking, the ones to kind of keep an eye out for, you've got your cat and tiger claws here with their poison ability. You've got the dirk with a silence effect in the early game. All the Damascus weapons later on in the game have a stun effect on there. For swords, you have the rapier and the cutlass coming in with false strike. Which, as odd as it sounds, is a debuff that you don't see come up that often, but you know, the right miss at the right time can actually be pretty darn beneficial. And once again, you know, stun effect over on that one there. You've got a breach effect coming in on the Zwei and the Glamour. You have a misstep on the battle axe as well as the Chukmak. That one is, as far as debuffs go, it's definitely down there in D tier. Basically just makes arrows more likely to hit, and they should be hitting 100% of the time anyway, so anyway. As far as spears go, you got a breach effect on the Volge, as well as a poison effect on the Scorpion, kind of getting the best of both claws and two-handers over there. For hammers, you've got a stun effect on the Iron Fan. So by the way, the Caldia and the Iron Fan, for folks that are coming back this time, the Caldia and Iron Fan are no longer gender-locked, but they are class-locked in kind of interesting ways. Generally speaking, though, the Iron Fan is the stun option, the Caldia is the charm kind of defensive caster weapon option. This actually is a lot more useful as an oh crap move than may initially seem obvious. Anyway, so we got a silence effect on the Balder Hammer for hammers. Not really much else going on there aside from those fans there. Stun effect on the Muzo for the one-handed katanas. Silence effect on the Mage Blade for the two-handed katanas, as well as a stun again on the Damask equivalent there. When it comes to these cudgels here, silence on the Exarch staff is actually a new one in this one. Kind of an odd effect. But it is a little bit of a funny one if you were to set that up. There are no guaranteed hit moves that you can use with this particular kind of staff, but you can guarantee a stun effect with the Damascus Mace, although it'll pretty much always do 1 damage, so if you'd like a stun baton, there you go. Actually, a Terra Knight with the Damascus Mace is just funny to me, because it's literally just a riot cop at that point. He's just there with his stun baton. Anyway, for the whips, the Clear Crack, sorry, has Drain Mind on there. Very useful for casters, but, you know, close range variant casters. And then the books are basically all going to be just changing the scaling racial bonus for that particular type of attack there. They have basically no attack value, but they gain 15% bonus damage as well as seemingly ignore armor for different things depending on what kind of book it is. They all have the same stats otherwise. Okay. Ranged weapon-wise, most of the blow darts are pretty darn interesting. However, just bear in mind, you can combine something like Eagle Eye with any of the blowguns to guarantee their effects. So you've got a stun, a charm, a just extra damage version, which is just kind of meh. You've got a poison effect on here, a silence effect, petrification, as well as a second high damage variant over here. As far as bows go, Balder comes with the Silence, you have a stun effect on the Damask, and then once you start getting to endgame bows, something to keep in mind is the first upgrade is the Cupido bow here, with a charm effect on there, so you can have guaranteed long-range charms. It is absolutely excellent. It's been one of my favorite late-game weapons so far. Anyway, crossbows, though, end up looking... Oh, actually, on bows, I forgot to mention basic short bow, stun effect. Alright, so bowgun +1 on the heavy crossbows. Very long range, guaranteed potential stun for archers there, as well as you can have a lighter variant here with the Damask crossbow with a chance to stun as well. To clarify, by the way, because this question came up a lot, when I say that a bowgun +1 is a guaranteed stun, not many classes can use this weapon, and most of them have a way to make it guaranteed. So like if a Dragoon, for example, puts a Slayer skill on there, it will always trigger the stun. If a Archer has Eagle Eye or Tremendous Shot active, then each of those shots will be guaranteed to stun. Anything that says 100% in the description will also carry over any secondary effects. So that's why I mentioned this one in particular. Almost every class that can use it can also guarantee it. Anyway, so next for the guns. This time around, is like, it's not like you really ever had much of a reason to go for these kind of mid-tier type of things. Mostly what it comes down to is you've got rimfire for your one-handed option, and then you've got musket coming in for your better option. Generally speaking, though, you're going to be running basic musket until you end up getting the book to upgrade this into a musket +1. So let's talk about these different books and where to actually get them. Alright, so first of all, like I said, these basic ones you just kind of get at the very start of the game there from the store. But you've got ones here like the Blade, or for example, you know, the Fusel or things like that. So the Fusel is the one we're actually going to cover first because it's kind of off by itself. So Fusel is technically one of the earliest ones that you can get. You have a optional side battle over here. If you read about the Ramson Wreck being raised, you have a fight over here. I believe it's actually a guaranteed drop from the fight itself. Back in the PSP version, this used to be one that you had to kill a particular Fusilier in the back of the map for. However, he definitely did not end up dropping it this time, but the map still gave it to me anyway, so I'm fairly confident that it is just the fight itself that ends up dropping the book this time. Another thing for long-timers here, as far as crafting books, I don't believe there's any in Farampa at this point. I'm not certain, but I have yet to find a single one. I've been through that thing several times. I haven't seen any showing up there. However, it does seem like the previous, like, you'd get 1 to 3 crafting books from the fortresses. It seems like you are pretty much guaranteed to get 2 to 3, just depending on whatever happens to drop there, from the bosses themselves. For a bit of clarity, in the PSP version, you had to seek out specific enemies in each of these areas for one of the crafting books, and then the second ones would end up dropping from the boss. This was, especially in the case of something like Gecko Fortress here, not great, because like in some cases it was stuff like, hey, here's this one zombie off in the corner that's already dead when you spawn into the map. Hope you remember to exercise them, otherwise you're not getting daggers. So either way, you know, something like that is just all on the boss now, so you can just rush through them, finish the maps however you'd like, get to the boss, and you are guaranteed your basic kind of third tier crafting books there. So first tier would be like your basic, you know, tier 1 store variants. The second ones would be your tier 2 store variants, as well as things like Way of the Gerges and Codex of Gems, which you will just get as the story progresses. And then your tier 3s here would be these ones in the fortresses. So these are going to be like, you know, the Blade, or I guess technically the Fusel could be considered part of this, because you do actually have to complete that in order to get to all these spots. But for example, stuff like the Blade, the Crossbow, all of that. So you'll get all of those in the fortresses, again, just from the bosses themselves. Just complete them however you will. For those that don't know how to unlock the fortresses, once you get in Chapter 2, it's a bit of a process. You hear about the Ramson Wreck being raised, and then this opens up Grimsby. You have a fight there. At that point, you will once again read the Warren Report, and it will tell you that there are... actually, can I... Well, hopefully this doesn't spoil too much. Anyway, so at that point, you find out... Yeah, this is not going to really help us here, because those news stories are already gone. Okay. So at that point, you will read that the fortresses were seized by various random parties. So you go into these fortresses, and you clear them all out. At which point, you will then go back to the Warren Report and read about the Apocrypha. At which point, we will go over to Crit and I, and then it will trigger another cutscene, basically with the Pope asking you, "Hey, would you like to know about super weapons? Are you sure that you're cool enough to handle this stuff?" At which point, you just tell him that it's fine, you're totally fine with the elemental nukes, and it will open up these. Now, one prerequisite to this is that at least one of his daughters has to be alive and in your party. In most cases, this will be Olivia, but basically, if you have any of the 4 characters that look like this, so if you've got Olivia, if you've got Sistina, who's currently dead on my timeline here, if you've got Sherry, or if you've got Saria, who is also dead on my timeline right now, then any one of them will be able to unlock all of the fortresses for you. So, again, you tell him yes, you can definitely deal with this information. Then you go to the fortresses, and each of them will have a gauntlet of fights as well as a boss fight. Something to bear in mind that could be potentially useful information. In most cases, for example, like if we go over to the water fortress over here, so if we go for the ice, water, whatever else fortresses, we'll notice that, for example, they have an octopus there, which is classed as a beast, and therefore a dragon, a dragoon would be able to more or less one-shot them. Same thing goes for the lightning one, who has a dragon there. But there are exceptions, like for example, the guy in the fire fortress, Ifrit, is classed as a fairy, despite looking like a cyclops. So, either way, just kind of something to bear in mind. If your dragon or your dragoon moves aren't exactly working, they might be classed as something else for lore reasons. Just kind of FYI. Okay, so what kind of stuff do you actually get out of all of this? So, for those initial variants there, or those initial kind of Tier 3 versions, we get stuff like this. So, for example, we see that we get upgrades to the Damascus weapons, which allows them to get that stun effect. You get some basic kind of dragon variants, all that kind of thing. Just basic upgrades that will later become other things. So, pretty generally useful stuff here. I think by far, probably the blade is probably the one that ends up giving you the most. Axe, spear, and hammer probably gives you the second most of all of this stuff. But like the blade ends up completely unlocking a lot of stuff around this point. So for example, Damask sword gets upgraded, Walloon sword gets upgraded. You get ice blades for any sword ice specialists, which again doesn't seem like much yet, but it's more significant than it sounds. But you get dagger upgrades. So anyway, at that point, we want the best ones. We want the best crafting books. And by the way, as far as Tier 4 variants, there's one kind of off on its own. But I believe the ones for upgrading instruments are still going to be in San Bronza. This is like way into the post game, so you don't really have to worry about that too much. But most of them are going to be over here in Palace of the Dead. Here's the thing. The Enchiridions used to be located all over Farampa, all over a bunch of random locations all over the map. Most of them appear to be just between floors about 10 and 30, dropped like candy absolutely everywhere. I mean, through just a couple trips in that area, I managed to pick up all of the Enchiridions, and in many cases there were many of them dropping at the same time. So, like for example, I got 2 Cudgel books in the same fight. So they do seem to be fairly, if not random, extremely generous. So you will easily get a hold of most of these Enchiridions. We like to jokingly call them enchiladas, but these are basically the best, like the best of the game, the best of the best when it comes to post-game weapons. Like personal favorite here with the Dragon Fang. You got a dagger that does 20% more bonus damage to dragons, additional just 24% bonus damage against everything if the unit is an Earth affinity, plus a poison effect on hit. Plus can be used on a Berserker, which just leads to some absolutely hilarious results. So if you really want a funny Berserker, Dragon Fang Berserker is hilarious. You get stuff like let's say the Iceberg there for, again, just very meaty ice knights and all of that kind of situation. One thing that was a little bit of a bummer is that the Dark Headsman is a little bit pointless this time around. This is a weapon that comes from the 2H Enchiridion. This is a thing that used to make Lament of the Dead viable back in the PSP version, just because it was the only weapon that gave you a Lament of the Dead bonus, which kind of made it like a dead gimme kind of situation, but in this case, it's just kind of an okay dark weapon, but either way. So that's all well and good there. Many of these weapons actually did change quite a bit from the PSP version. Like, for example, the Stardust, you used to have to sacrifice a weapon that you get in, like, Coda 4 in order to be able to even make this thing. So that was a bit iffy. Same thing with the Ignis. You used to have to sacrifice a weapon that pretty much nobody ever got a hold of. And so now you can just kind of get it. So you can have your Fire and Fire, Light, and whatever else spears, pretty well early into this thing. But generally speaking, yes, a lot of your fancy endgame variants are going to come from those Enchiridions, but they are going to require stuff from those Elemental Temple books in order to upgrade. So, for example, like, let's say we wanted to make a... where was it here? So, like, say we wanted to make a Lightbringer here. So we needed a Makwahatl. In order to make the Makwahatl, we need to get a Tiger Blade, which is going to be over here back in this one, which requires a different crafting book, which then also requires gems. So it's gems into katana, into 2 each katana in order to make this thing. So in order, for example, to make the Bringer of Light, you need 4 different recipes, 3 different weapons. So it gets a bit more involved at this point, but it does give you a lot more freedom in terms of the kinds of weird builds you can do. As far as anyone can tell, to my knowledge, most of these wands this time around are more or less the same thing, just kind of what thing do you want to resist. So, for example, being better at air makes you resist earth stuff and all that. Generally speaking, though, yeah, most of these stabs are going to be the same thing of just +5 range, charge MP for 100. Staff of Purification is generally just going to be the best for most people. Because for both your basic casters as well as your better endgame casters, just having that free exorcism is absolutely fantastic. And yeah, so that's how you get a hold of most of these. Again, floors 11 to 30 for Palace of the Dead. It's just raining loot in there. It's hilarious. And then finally, if you want to get Secrets of the Master, which is, I don't actually know what's in that one yet because it takes forever to get a hold of. But for that one, you have to be in Chapter 4, you have to have run into Nibeth before, and then you have to do all of his story events going through Palace of the Dead, which basically just consists of you clear Palace of the Dead in Chapter 4. Killing him will give you Secrets of the Master, and then if you are to go back and clear it a second time, then you fight a guy named Blackmore in his place, who is a D&D reference, who then also drops a unique item. This isn't really a crafting book, but either way, it's just kind of interesting. Alrighty, so over here on the armor side of things, got a few different variants here. Basically, early on, few things to consider. Something like the Circlet may not necessarily be the highest thing armor-wise, but bear in mind, if you go a few tabs over here to the 4th section here, you'll notice resistances, and these actually can matter quite a decent bit. So, for example, Bronze Helm +1 may be the basic one that you start with, but that 1% damage reduction against a lot of different things, by which I mean every racial type in the game, is actually surprisingly quite a bit more significant than even the jump in defense right here. So basically, just kind of to briefly cover this, defense will more or less catch your damage on the back end. So there's 3 phases to this whole armor system. I know, it's been a whole 5 minutes since I've talked about the armor system, but basically it's stats versus stats. Then it's scaling versus scaling, and then it's equipment versus equipment, more or less. There's a lot more to it, but that's the way you can kind of see it. So, for example, something like the Damascus Helm Plus over here, compared to the Bronze Helm, would basically shave 13 damage off of whatever the final number was. It's not amazingly significant, but in some cases it can be just enough. Again, there's a lot more to it, but basically if we look over at these different scaling things here, you can see that 8% reduced off of all elemental types is going to be fairly significant, or for example 1% taken off of this is again going to be a bit more significant than defensive bonuses in a lot of cases. But any darn ways, as far as these goes, generally speaking, when it comes to your armor, what you really want to be going for is stats in different situations. Like, you know, heavy hitters, you probably want to be stacking strength. Range characters, you want to be stacking dexterity. And just so you know, because this comes up all the dang time, strength, dexterity, adding defense or defense, it's not a Fire Emblem. It's not that simple. It's not just, you're adding this number, and that's the end of that. Basically, you're adding a whole lot of different things together. So, for example, a few points of like, let's say, vitality are going to be more worth it than pretty much any amount of armor in most situations, because it's essentially stopping the damage before it ends up getting anywhere. So, for example, something like the Chainmail +1 is actually pretty decently valuable as far as armor goes, because the 2 vitality and 1 strength that you get off of it is, again, catching damage before it gets a chance to go anywhere, whereas, for example, something like the heavier armor might end up catching it on the back end. Granted, at this point, Worm Scale is the direct upgrade over it, so, 6 vitality and 3 strength is going to matter a whole lot more than the 2 vit, 1 strength off this Chainmail here. But, for example, if we're comparing it with, say, the Brigandine would be a lot better for ranged characters with that 5 dexterity bonus. Whereas, for example, a melee character might be interested in sticking with Chainmail a little while longer until they get something a bit heavier. Whereas something like the Damask retains its ability to be sort of an offensive vest sort of variant. So it's just solid overall for a lot of melee type of characters. But again, there's a lot of things to consider. Like the resistance off the Damask ends up being pretty darn valuable, whereas, for example, the casting stats off of Baldur might be worth it for something like a Terror Knight. So either way, you're not always just looking for the bigger number, just kind of so you're aware. But anyway, so yeah, as far as armors and weapons and all that kind of thing, that's kind of what you need to bear in mind. They're all going to be mixes of different stats and whatever else. Generally speaking, just because something is available earlier doesn't mean it's going to be terrible later on. For example, something like leather sleeves does actually end up lasting a lot of characters for quite a while. Something like leather gloves is, again, for some classes, just going to be all they get for quite a dang long time. So it's pretty worth upgrading those. But it's worth checking in every now and then just to see what's going on. So, for example, the Nomad Bracers, which lost half of their stat upgrades since the PSP version, are still here as the kind of best in slot, so to speak, archer glove for most situations. Sure, you get some better ones down the line, but, just kind of something to bear in mind. Now, again, as far as stats go, it's the way that it kind of seems to me, I'm still waiting on exact confirmation on this, but basically the way that it seems to be easier to kind of parse this information here is that strength seems to be more useful in most situations for most of your physical type attacks, whereas dexterity tends to be essentially giving you a higher higher potential maximum, but usually most dex weapons will have a harder time dealing past armor. So, for example, that's where we get stuff like dexterity scaling much harder for archers, meaning that you get those situations where an archer might do 10 damage to one guy and 1200 to another. They scale incredibly well, but they don't exactly do well versus armor. Anyway, so that's kind of where that all winds up. And just so you know, there's one little quirk coming off the PSP version that, for better or worse, followed the same route as the One Vision overhaul did several years ago, which is that a lot of these shields have lost their immunities. So, for example, you still need to have the items for said immunities on these items, but unfortunately, they did not actually end up retaining their immunity, so you're mostly using them for stats. Was a little bit of a bummer. I was really expecting there to be like a tier 3 variant that gave them back their immunities, or at least their resists or something. A little bit surprised that didn't end up happening there, but you know what? Who knows? Maybe that might end up getting patched in the future. I have absolutely no clue. But generally speaking, when it comes to a lot of these shields, their defense value is roughly going to be about the same, but you're really going, again, more for stats. So like a Baldur might be a more caster-orientated shield. Something like the Spiked Shield might be good for either skill users or kind of a skirmisher, light ranged weapon type units there. Something like the Tower Shield is good for offensive melee units, whereas something like the Aspice would be kind of better on something like the Berserker with that extra strength bonus. Again, these are minor bonuses, but they do tend to be fairly noticeable if you start building towards particular stats. Interestingly enough, by the way, some of your later game variants here, like the Ancient Dragon Scale, is actually better than the Relic Dragon Scale that you can find, for the most part, at least in its initial version. If you combine enough like Relic Dragon Scales together, it'll end up being the better shield, whereas the Ancient Dragon Scale is, just over here giving you it's essentially just giving you a good, solid overall shield here. Up into the end game, you'll start noticing that your casters and healers, generally speaking, you're going to want them to upgrade to their particular pants and gloves. They're stuck with slops and basic leathers up till then. And then, as far as jewelry goes, these, again, have changed quite a bit since the PSP version. So, when it comes to their skill bonus, it's dramatically more noticeable, I feel, in this version than it was last time around, where they seem to be essentially countering, kind of getting past armor a lot better. That 20 skill bonus on there. But at the same time, they've definitely seen quite a hit in terms of their resistance. So this used to be like 40% resistance against all damage types back in the PSP version. However, the 5% damage resistance is still very significant. Like, overall, you still have earrings showing up as your defensive option, and you still have chokers showing up as your offensive option. So chokers will essentially scale up your elemental damage, whereas the earrings will improve your weapon skill and defense against all units. All right, and next, as far as medicines go, just kind of to bear this in mind, it's worth carrying different versions of different medicines at different times. So for example, something like Mending +1 is pretty darn fantastic, because it allows you to... basically allows you to take a quick heal for 375. That's going to be, again, useful into the end game. Generally, what I like to do is to keep various versions of seeds on hand. So, for example, you just have one seed, one salve, so you have a quick heal, and then you have a full heal. And, I mean, you can go a little bit higher here into the Mending Essence. The Essence is a bit more expensive, and realistically, 75% is usually as good as all health in most situations. Obviously, there will be exceptions. Like, for example, something like a Griffin or whatever else, they're already pretty darn fast. They have a hell of a lot of health, especially with Constitution on them, so giving them an Essence is generally going to be a pretty solid choice. Whereas, for example, for most of your frontliners, generally speaking, having most of their health back, enough to have them continue pushing, that extra 10 recovery time that they save off of losing that 25% health is generally going to be a bit more useful. Are there exceptions? Sure. And then this is why you keep the seed as well, so that if they only need to top off, you have a lighter variant that will just kind of handle one hit or two, and then you have the heavier variant that'll essentially get them back into the fight after they've been beat around a bit. Additionally, if you want an infinite MP item, the seeds are something that you seeds and leaves and things like that are something that you find along the ground as you travel along. Basically, they're always picked up off the ground because they grow locally. So, for some reason, shops have decided not to capitalize on this, but they grow locally. Interesting little lore note on this, by the way. So for those that didn't know, a lot of factors of these games are based off of, you know, the most commonly known one is the Balkans and things like that. But certain bits of it also seem to be very prevalently based off stuff that happened in the Baltics as well. They did mention there was the Balkans and other similar wars, and one in particular, so I grew up around a lot of Lithuanian culture and things like that, and one thing that I find particularly funny is that a lot of the outfits look very similar to that region. Like, especially things like the archers and whatnot just look very similar there. The female knight looks very similar to a traditional Lithuanian dress. Whereas when it comes to the magic leaves, and this is a bit of an odd one, but the national plant over there is, well, you know, the thing you use to make hemp. And I used to hear a whole lot from older folks from that region about how they had nursery rhymes about, you know, a dad smoking a pipe or whatever else, just picking up those plants on the way home. And it's just funny to me. I don't know if this was an intentional or accidental lore thing, but yeah, you pick these up on the way, you know, just kind of along the road, so to speak. Many of the locals already just kind of have them with them. But then, yeah, if you want an actual infinite MP item, you just go make these Fruits of the Adept. But either way, when it comes to those leaves, they're just, you know, something that helps the meditative wizards meditate when their meditate didn't trigger. So, you know, again, take all of that as you will. I mean, you know, obviously, as far as you know, heavy pants and whatever else being very popular among the locals, you know, again, tie these things all together as you will. There's implications there, just like everything else is what I'm getting at. I do find it funny, though, that particular thing tends to be, it tends to trigger some folks more than all of the war crimes in this series. Anyway, so, back to it then. And go figure then, I ended up missing probably one of the most important bits here, which is just that, yeah, all of these different upgraded movement items will essentially give you different benefits to your different movement types. So, for example, your body armor, generally speaking, will give you a weight effect. You'll get a jumping effect, slash a climbing effect, off of improving your gloves, and then you'll end up moving one tile farther with upgraded pants. So this, I mean, obviously, some versions will have different things on there, but generally speaking, that's what it boils down to. Any darn ways, so that's about that for this one. I will probably have to make an updated version of this as more information comes out, but that's everything that I have at the moment. So hopefully this is helpful. This question comes up all the dang time, so hopefully this answered a few things. And y'all have a good one. Let me know what I missed, because I know there will be plenty. Alright, take care.